The morning sun barely crept over the tree line, casting long shadows across the parade ground at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island. The air was thick with humidity and the kind of tension that could only be found in a place where boys and girls arrived, but Marines were supposed to leave. Among the sea of olive-drab shirts and high and tight haircuts, one figure moved with a purpose that set her apart from the trembling recruits. Staff Sergeant Eva Reyes stood at the head of Platoon 3042, her eyes scanning the formation with the intensity of a hawk watching field mice. She was an anomaly in this world, a female drill instructor on the legendary Yellow Footprints, a position earned through sheer grit and in refusal to accept that any barrier was too high. Eva was not tall, standing barely 5'4" in her boots. But her presence filled the entire squad bay. Her face was chiseled from years of discipline, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that missed nothing. The famous campaign cover sat low on her forehead, casting a shadow that made her gaze even more intimidating. She had been doing this for 3 years now, having already molded hundreds of civilians into the beginnings of warriors. But Platoon 3042 was different. They were a challenge, a collection of scared kids from every corner of America who thought they knew what they were getting into. They had no idea. For the past 72 hours, Eva had been the embodiment of chaos and terror. She got in their faces, screaming until her voice went hoarse, demanding they move faster, speak louder, stand straighter. She watched them eat in 3 minutes flat, forced them to memorize the chain of command while doing push-ups in the sand, and corrected every infraction with a volume that rattled the windows. This was the way it had to be. The crucible awaited them in a few weeks, and if they couldn't handle her, they would never handle combat. It was the 4th day of training when the storm came. Not the kind from the sky, but the kind that wore polished boots and carried a swagger stick. Senior drill instructor Hatcher was a relic from a different era, a man who had been on Paris Island since before Eva had even enlisted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel being crushed under a tank track. For 15 years, he had ruled his platoons with an iron fist and a philosophy that women had no place on the drill field. He made no secret of his opinions. In the staff lounge, he would mutter under his breath about political correctness and how the Corps was going soft. The fact that Eva had been assigned to his company, working alongside him, was an insult he wore openly on his sleeve. That morning, the platoon was on the grinder, practicing manual of arms with their dummy rifles. The sun was climbing higher, and sweat poured down the recruits' faces as they moved through the movements. Eva stood at the front, calling cadence, her voice sharp and clear. "Present! Arms!" 120 wooden rifles snapped into position. Mostly, Private Kowalski was a beat slow. Again. Hatcher appeared from nowhere, striding across the grinder with the confidence of a predator. He ignored Eva completely, walking straight to Kowalski and getting so close their noses almost touched. "What in the blue hell was that? Private? You call that present arms? My grandmother moves faster and she's been dead for 20 years. Kowalski trembled, his eyes fixed on a point over Hatcher's shoulder, too afraid to blink. Eva stepped forward. "Senior drill instructor, I have the platoon. I'll correct the deficiency." Hatcher turned slowly, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You'll correct it? You couldn't correct a typo, Reyes. This platoon is a disaster, and everyone knows why." The temperature on the grinder seemed to drop 20 degrees. Recruits stood frozen, not daring to breathe. They had never seen one drill instructor challenge another, especially not a female staff sergeant going up against a male senior with 20 years in the game. Eva's jaw tightened, but her voice remained controlled. "With respect, Senior. I was given this platoon by the company commander. I am fully capable of handling my duties." Hatcher laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the entire parade ground. Your duties are to look pretty for the photos and stay out of the way of real training. Everyone knows the only reason you're wearing that cover is to fill a quota. Women don't belong on the drill field, and they sure as hell don't belong in the Marine Corps infantry. You're a liability, Reyes, a distraction. These recruits need a real Marine, not a babysitter with an attitude problem. The words hit like physical blows. Eva felt the heat rise in her chest, the familiar burn of injustice that she had fought her entire career. She thought about the 20-mile hikes with full packs, the expert rifle scores, at the deployment to Afghanistan, where she had come under fire just like everyone else. She thought about the blood, sweat, and tears she had poured into earning this position. And now, this man, this fossil, was reducing it all to nothing in front of her platoon. Recruit Maria Santos, a young woman from Texas with fire in her eyes, took an involuntary step forward. Eva saw it from the corner of her vision and shot her a look that froze her in place. This was not a recruit's fight. This was hers. "Senior drill instructor," Eva said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I will not debate my qualifications with you on the grinder. If you have issues with my performance, you can take them to the company office, but you will not undermine my authority in front of my platoon." Hatcher's eyes gleamed with triumph, and he had gotten under her skin, and he knew it. "Your platoon? They're not your platoon, sweetheart. They're mine. You're just borrowing them until I decide you've had enough playtime. Now get out of my way and let me do some real training." He turned his back on her, a calculated insult, a dismissal, and faced the platoon. "Listen up, you maggots. From now on, you answer to me. Staff Sergeant Reyes is going to be reassigned to something more appropriate, like typing or making coffee." A few recruits snickered nervously, unsure how to react. Most stood frozen, watching the drama unfold with wide eyes. Hatcher reached out and grabbed Private Kowalski's rifle, yanking it from his hands. "This is how you present arms, Private. Like you actually give a damn about being a Marine. Watch." He demonstrated the movement, smooth and precise, and then thrust the rifle back at Kowalski so hard it almost knocked the recruit over. "Now you try. And if you fail again, you'll be on the quarterdeck until your arms fall off." Eva stood motionless, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to report him to the battalion commander, to follow the chain of command like she had been taught. But something else burned inside her, a primal, visceral reaction to being disrespected in front of those she was sworn to lead. If she walked away now, she would lose this platoon forever. They would never trust her, never respect her, never believe that she had what it took to guide them through the hell that was about to come. Hatcher continued his tirade, now moving down the ranks, criticizing every recruit within arm's reach. He paused in front of Private First Class Williams, and a massive kid from Chicago who had been struggling with the academic portions of training, but worked harder than anyone. "You," Hatcher sneered, poking Williams in the chest. "You look like you should be playing football, not pretending to be a Marine. What's your problem, boy? Can't keep up with the women's program?" Williams's face flushed dark red, but he held his position, eyes forward. Hatcher leaned in closer. "I asked you a question, recruit. When a drill instructor speaks to you, you answer. Or did your mommy not teach you any manners?" That was it. That was the line. Eva moved before she consciously decided to. Later, she would describe it as muscle memory, the kind of reflexive action that comes from years of training until your body knows what to do before your brain catches up. The Hatcher heard the footsteps and started to turn, a smirk still on his face. "What? You want some of—" He never finished the sentence. Ava's first step planted her firmly, transferring her weight forward. Her left hand shot out, not to strike, but to control, grabbing his wrist and twisting it in a motion that locked his arm straight. At the same time, her right foot swept behind his, and she dropped her center of gravity like she was sitting in a chair. It was a perfect hip throw, the kind taught in Marine Corps martial arts program, executed with textbook precision. Hatcher's eyes went wide with shock as he felt his balance disappear. For one frozen moment, he was suspended in the air, his 6'2" frame horizontal, looking up at the sky. Then gravity took over. He hit the grinder with a sound like a sack of potatoes falling off a truck. The impact drove the air from his lungs in an explosive grunt, and his campaign cover went flying, bouncing across the pavement. The silence that followed was absolute. 120 recruits stood motionless, their mouths hanging open, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A female staff sergeant, barely over 5 feet tall, had just put a senior drill instructor on his back in the middle of the parade ground. Ava released his wrist and stepped back, her breathing controlled, her face an unreadable mask. She looked down at Hatcher, who was still trying to suck air back into his lungs, his face purple with a mixture of pain and rage. "Senior drill instructor," she said, her voice carrying across the entire grinder. "In the Marine Corps, we teach that any Marine, regardless of gender, is capable of defending themselves and others. I just demonstrated that lesson. If you would like a remedial class, my office hours are posted." Hatcher scrambled to his feet, his face a thundercloud of fury. For a moment, Eva thought he might actually swing at her, which would have been a catastrophic mistake, given the dozen witnesses and the cameras mounted on every building. But something in her eyes, or maybe the memory of that throw, made him hesitate. "This isn't over," he spat, bending to retrieve his cover. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." He stormed off across the grinder, leaving Ava standing alone in front of the platoon. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Private Santos started to smile. It was small at first, just the corner of her mouth twitching. Then Private Williams let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Then, like a wave breaking, the tension shattered. Recruits began to grin, to nudge each other, to steal glances at the small woman who had just become a legend. Ava let them have their moment. She understood what they were feeling. The release, the awe, the dawning realization that the world was not quite what they had been taught. But she also knew that discipline had to be maintained. "Platoon!" she barked, and instantly every spine straightened, every face snapped forward. "What are you looking at? There is nothing to see here. You will forget what just happened. You will speak of it to no one. Is that understood?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant!" the platoon roared in unison. "Good. Now we have training to conduct. Private Kowalski." "I front and center. Let's work on that present arms until you can do it in your sleep." The rest of the day passed in a blur of drill, physical training, and classes on the history of the Corps. Ava pushed them harder than ever, demanding perfection, correcting every mistake with the intensity that bordered on ferocious. But there was something different in the way the recruits responded. They moved faster, tried harder, pushed through pain they would have surrendered to before. They had seen something that morning that changed their understanding of what was possible. That evening, as the sun set over the marshlands of Paris Island, Eva sat alone in her office, staring at the wall. The adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. Hatcher was right about one thing. This wasn't over. He had connections, friends in high places, 20 years of institutional memory on his side. She was just a staff sergeant with 3 years on the drill field and a reputation for being difficult. Her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, battalion commander. She took a deep breath and picked up. "Staff Sergeant Reyes." "Reyes, this is Colonel Matthews. I need you in my office, now." The walk across the battalion area felt like a death march. Every step echoed on the pavement, each one bringing her closer to what she assumed would be the end of her career. She had assaulted a senior non-commissioned officer in front of witnesses. No matter the provocation, no matter the circumstances, that was a court-martial offense. She could be reduced in rank, discharged, sent home in disgrace. She knocked on the colonel's door. "Enter." Colonel Matthews was a lean man in his 50s, with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen everything the Marine Corps could throw at him. He sat behind his desk, a single sheet of paper in front of him. Hatcher stood in the corner, his arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," Matthews said, his voice neutral. "I understand there was an incident on the grinder this morning." "Yes, sir." Eva stood at attention, her eyes fixed on the wall behind him. There was no point in making excuses. She would accept whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. Matthews looked at the paper, then at Hatcher, then back at Eva. "Senior Drill Instructor Hatcher has filed a formal complaint. He alleges that you assaulted him without provocation, that you are a danger to the training environment, and that you should be immediately removed from the drill field." Hatcher's smirk widened. "Like I said, Colonel, she's unstable, a liability." Matthews held up a hand, silencing him. Then he pressed a button on his desk. "Sergeant Major, would you send in the recruits?" The door opened and 3 recruits filed in, Private Santos, Private Williams, and Private Kowalski. They stood at rigid attention, their faces pale with nerves. Matthews leaned back in his chair. "I want each of you to tell me in your own words what you saw on the grinder this morning. Start with you, Private Santos." Santos swallowed hard, glanced at Eva, then at Hatcher, then back at the colonel. "Sir, I saw Senior Drill Instructor Hatcher approach the platoon. He began, correcting Private Kowalski. Then he turned to Staff Sergeant Reyes and said some things. Sir, disrespectful things. About women not belonging in the Corps. About Staff Sergeant being a quota fill. Then he turned his back on her and started yelling at Privates Williams and Kowalski. He said something to Private Williams about his mother, sir. That's when Staff Sergeant moved. It was one motion, sir. She grabbed his wrist and put him on the ground. She didn't hit him. She just stopped him." Matthews' expression didn't change. "Private Williams, your account." Williams stood taller. "Sir, Private Santos is correct. Senior Drill Instructor was in my face, sir. He was yelling, calling me names. Staff Sergeant Reyes told him to stop, but he wouldn't. He turned his back on her. When he grabbed my rifle and started again, she intervened, sir. She used a MCMAP technique, a hip throw. She didn't strike him. She just controlled him and put him on the ground. Then she stepped back and told him if he needed a remedial class, her office hours were posted." Despite the gravity of the situation, Williams's lip twitched slightly at the memory. Kowalski, still terrified, confirmed the same account. "Sir, Senior Drill Instructor was very aggressive, sir. He took my rifle. He was screaming. Staff Sergeant Reyes told him she had the platoon. He ignored her. He said things, sir. Really disrespectful things. Then he turned his back, and she stopped him. Like Private Williams said, sir. One move. He was on the ground." Matthews was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between the 3 recruits. Then he dismissed them with a nod. "Thank you. You're dismissed. Return to your platoon." The door closed behind them. The silence in the room was absolute. Matthews turned to Hatcher. "Senior Drill Instructor, you had 3 witnesses to this incident. Every one of them corroborates Staff Sergeant Reyes's account. They describe you as the aggressor, using inappropriate language, turning your back on a fellow drill instructor, and continuing a tirade after being asked to stop." Hatcher's face was draining of color. "Sir, those recruits are biased. They're in her platoon. They'll say anything to protect her." "Are you calling my recruits liars, Senior?" Matthews's voice was soft, but it carried an edge like a razor. "Because if you are, we can expand this investigation. We can pull video footage from the grinder cameras. We can interview every single member of Platoon 3042. Would you like me to do that?" Hatcher's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Matthews stood, and suddenly the room felt very small. "Here's what's going to happen, Senior. You're going to go back to your quarters and pack your bags. By 0800 tomorrow, You'll be on a plane to Camp Lejeune, where you'll be assigned to a support battalion pending a full investigation into your conduct. You will not set foot on this depot again without my personal authorization. Do you understand?" Hatcher looked like he had been struck by lightning. "But, sir—" "That's an order, Senior. Dismissed." Hatcher stood frozen for a moment, then snapped a salute, turned, and walked out. He didn't look at Eva on his way past. When the door closed, Matthews sat back down and regarded Eva with an expression that might have been approval. "Staff Sergeant, you put me in a difficult position today." "Sir, I apologize for any—" "Let me finish. You put me in a difficult position because now I have to figure out how to handle a situation where a female staff sergeant physically subdued a male senior drill instructor who had twice her size and 20 years of experience. If I follow standard procedure, I have to at least consider disciplinary action for the physical altercation, regardless of provocation." Ava's heart sank. "But," Matthews continued, "if I do that, I'm essentially punishing you for defending yourself and your authority in front of your platoon. And that sends a message I'm not willing to send, not on my watch." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where the evening flag was being lowered. "Do you know why I became a Marine, Reyes?" "Sir, no, sir. Because when I was a kid, I watched my father, who was a Marine, stand up to a group of men who were harassing a woman on the subway. He was smaller than all of them. Didn't matter. He stood his ground, and he changed the outcome of that situation. He told me later that being a Marine wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about being willing to act when action was required." He turned back to face her. "What you did today took guts. It also took skill and training. You didn't strike him, you controlled him. You demonstrated exactly what we teach in MCMAP, proportional response, de-escalation through physical control. And you did it in front of your entire platoon, showing them that a Marine's authority comes from competence, not from size or gender." Eva felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but she kept her face neutral. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. There's going to be fallout from this. Hatcher has friends. There will be whispers, rumors, people questioning whether you should have handled it differently. But here's the thing, Reyes. You did handle it, and now you have a platoon that would walk through fire for you. That's worth more than any amount of political maneuvering." He returned to his desk and picked up the paper, Hatcher's complaint, and tore it in half. "You're dismissed, Staff Sergeant. I expect to see Platoon 3042 on the top of the honor grad list at final drill. Don't prove me wrong." Eva saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and walked out of the office on legs that suddenly felt weak. The next morning, Platoon 3042 assembled on the grinder with a new energy. Yet word had spread through the recruit grapevine. No one knew exactly how, but recruits always found out, about what had happened in the colonel's office. They stood a little taller, moved a little sharper, watched Eva with eyes that held something beyond fear. Eva walked down the ranks, inspecting each recruit, correcting a button here, a collar there. When she reached Private Santos, she paused. "Private Santos, you did well yesterday. Speaking up takes courage." Santos's eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant." "Don't thank me. Thank me by passing the crucible. Thank me by earning the title. That's all the thanks I need." She moved on, but Santos carried that moment with her through the rest of training. Weeks passed. The crucible came and went. Yet with Platoon 3042 marching through the 54-hour ordeal with a cohesion that surprised even the veteran instructors. They supported each other, carried each other's gear, refused to let anyone quit. When they stood on the parade deck for the final time, having earned the title United States Marine, Eva watched from the reviewing stand with something she rarely allowed herself to feel: pride. After the ceremony, as families swarmed the newly minted Marines, Private Santos, now Private First Class Santos, meritoriously promoted, approached Eva and came to attention. "Staff Sergeant Reyes, may I speak with you?" Eva nodded. Santos's eyes were bright. I just wanted to say, you changed everything for me, for us. When I saw you stand up to senior drill instructor, I realized that being a Marine isn't about being the loudest or the meanest. It's about being willing to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I'm going to carry that with me my whole career. Ava looked at this young woman, so full of fire and determination, and saw a reflection of herself 15 years ago. Santos, you did the work. I just showed you what was possible. The rest was all you. No, Staff Sergeant. You showed us that the title isn't just a word, it's a promise. And you kept that promise for all of us. She saluted, and Ava returned it with a precision born of decades of practice. As Santos walked away to join her family, Ava stood alone on the edge of the parade deck, watching the sun set over Paris Island. Somewhere in the distance, another platoon was marching, and another set of recruits was being transformed. The work never ended. But moments like this, moments when she knew, deep in her bones, that she had made a difference, those made it all worthwhile. She thought about Hatcher, probably still fuming in some office at Lejeune, still convinced that women didn't belong. And she smiled. Not because she had won, not because she had proven him wrong, but because she had done something far more important. She had shown a platoon of young Americans that the Marine Corps was bigger than any one person's prejudice, that the title was earned through blood and sweat and sacrifice, not through chromosomes or centuries of tradition. I'm task force, she had said, not in words, but in action. And the task force, the brotherhood and sisterhood of Marines, had answered. The evening breeze carried the sound of cadence from across the base, the rhythmic call and response of Marines marching in the fading light. Eva turned and walked toward her quarters, her boots echoing on the pavement, a small woman in a big world who had proven once and for all that size had nothing to do with strength.